Fantastic. Let's get started. Thanks everybody, and welcome. Sally and I are very excited to have everyone join us here today, and also for those who are watching the replay, to the launch of the State of Workplace Burnout report. This is the fifth year of the report, and it's been really wonderful to see, the steady growth of interest in this report, and the impact that the insights from previous reports have played in organizations' policies, the strategies, and the general conversation about what work should look like within the future. So next page. Now, before we get started, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I work and live, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present. I would also like to extend that respect to the traditional custodians of the land where you joined us today. For those of you not familiar with Infinite Potential, we are an independent think tank focused on providing research, diagnostics, and evaluations to understand today's complex workplace issues. Using a systems approach, we partner with leaders in business, government, and the community services sector to shed light on these complex dynamics that are shaping the workplace today. With so many different kind of changes to the way that we're working, how we work, and also this sort of changing relationship of work. There's no templates to follow really anymore. And what we need right now is up-to-date research and insights to kind of design and rethink the workplace. So what we're seeing today, with stagnant productivity, issues in attraction and retention, and rising kind of worker compensation cases. All of that we believe is sort of the result of organizations trying to force their people into a way of working that is no longer applicable and is frankly sort of obsolete for today's kind of workforce. And so Infinite Potential, we really believe that we can make workplaces a haven in this uncertain world with so much stuff going on all around us by by building this kind of stable workplace and sustainable workplace, we can create a better society with that as well. So we're really, again, excited to kind of share our insights with you today. Having done all of the analysis and just basically kind of talking through a lot of this just between the two of us and a few others during the couple of months, it's great to be able to kind of talk and share this with others. What you'll see in the following presentation is that we've uncovered some answers, but also we found even more questions to ask. And one of the limitations about conducting a global study is the generalizations that has to be made. And after the session, we would love to have a chat with you about how these insights resonate with you, your organization, or your industry. When we're able to kind of apply these findings to a particular organization or sectors, that's when that magic happens. That's when we start creating and being able to create the solutions for a better workplace. Actually, and just one sort of housekeeping thing. Please note that, like, unlike our other sessions, we will not be having a Q&A session today, just simply due to timing and also the number of people on the call. If you have a question, please type it in the comments and we'll get back to you, or we'd be happy to set up a time to kind of have a chat to go through a lot more of the details in the report. As you can kind of imagine, we do have a lot more data than what we are what we present. And so we're happy to kind of talk through a lot more of the details about what we have found as well. Now, before we get into the findings, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page regarding the definition of burnout. And I apologize to a lot of you out there who have been hearing me bang on about this the last couple of years, but I really believe this is one of the biggest barriers actually that we see as holding us back from actually properly addressing the problem. The term burnout has really become popularized in the last couple of years. And that's been a really positive thing. It's brought more attention. So it's started to really help destigmatize talking about this topic. But at the same time, it's kind of become a bit of a buzzword that often gets kind of misconstrued. A lot of times, burnout is used interchangeably with just exhaustion. And people talk about being burnt out on so many things, from work to caring. I've even heard some people talk about being burnt out on big South Australian Shiraz, like everything you can be burnt out on. And it's really important that we have the same definition if we are looking to um, find a solution for it. In 2019, the World Health Organization defined burnout as a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So this defines burnout as an experience specific to work. So think of burnout like champagne, it can only come from one place. And so the reason why, again, this is important is because it provides that focus on the root cause of the problem and also where the solution lies. It doesn't mean that a person can experience extreme levels of exhaustion or negativity or disengagement in other parts of their lives outside of work, but that's different than burnout. And also, if burnout can stem from everything and anything, it gives leaders and organizations an excuse to sort of not address this important issue. If they think, oh, and if it could be a number of things that's causing this. So, our hands are tied about actually doing something about it. So it's really important that we kind of focus it on there. And in the definition of burnout, there are three dimensions to it: exhaustion, cynicism, and reduced professional efficacy. And when a person's experiencing all three of these dimensions at the same time, that's when burnout has set in. So having just one, and this is one kind of common misnomer. So if you're just exhausted, that doesn't mean you're burnt out. You need to have all three. So let's say you're exhausted, but you're still really loving your work and you're doing great at it. You're not really burnt out. You just maybe have too much on. Or another instance, if you really hate your job, but you're still doing it really well, and you've got a manageable workload, also that doesn't mean you're burnout. So it's sort of having all three of these dimensions at the same time. And that's what makes this such a complex issue to kind of address. Because as all three of those dimensions sets in, they sort of start feeding on each other to kind of develop this very difficult kind of spiral to kind of get out of. And just one last thing, if you take away one thing from today, please make it this: that burnout is not an individual failing. At its core, burnout is a consequence of how work is designed and structured. So no amount of self-care, a holiday here or mindfulness session there can really counteract the impacts of being in an environment where there's sort of constant, long hours, high pressure, unrealistic demands, and that toxic work environment. And all those things can kind of treat it at that symptom level, but not really address it properly. Next page. So what we've seen in the past 12 months is that work is facing a defining moment. This is a time of relentless uncertainty. You only have to turn on the news or radio to hear about all the things that's going on. There's a lot of new advances in technology that's also shaping and creating a lot of uncertainty in the world of work, and also shifting workplace cultures. Work is no longer just purely defined by one job and office that you go to, or this rigid hierarchy. If organizations want to improve productivity, they want to cut costs, and they want to mitigate risk, they really need a new paradigm of work that aligns the needs of the organization with their people. And this is what we're really our focus this year with this year's report. In this year's study, we had 2,250 participants from 47 different countries. Of those, 29% of the participants were from Australia. Actually, I want to take a quick opportunity to kind of thank all of those who've participated in the study sort of this year and years before. And without all of the help that you provide by participating and also sharing it with your network. We couldn't do this without the support from all of you. So thank you all for kind of participating and kind of supporting this piece of research. So for this year's report, we've put together 5 workplace trends that we believe needs to be a priority for leaders and organizations. First, we'll talk about the trends in burnout and how well people are faring today. With 5 years of data, we're able to kind of see pretty clearly some trends that we'll share. Next, the studies looked into examining intersectionality in the workplace. So as we look deeper into why a lot of well-being initiatives really don't have the impact that it really should, what becomes clear to us is that people experience work differently. We all have different identities that we bring to the workplace. And what this means is that a lot of times what we see is these sort of one-size-fits-all initiatives, and that won't address everybody's needs equally. And then in that third point, the study then really focuses on productivity this year, as it's basically the priority for pretty much every organization and leader and a country out there. We wanted to really look into and provide the insights into some of the drivers and barriers about how do you get out of this productivity lull? Because we hear a lot of suggestions out there, and we see a lot of things that some leaders are trying, and we really want to provide the insights about what works and what doesn't. The fourth focus there is the fourth focus for the study this year is the evaluation of workplace trust. Now, we've been seeing a global erosion of trust, and organizations are not immune. So this is quite a big trend that's been going on for quite a while now. During COVID, people saw how caring their organizations can be. But in the past couple of years, what they've been seeing is mass layoffs, continuous sort of reorganizations, and winding back of a lot of the support that's been put in. And we wanted to kind of understand how this would affect the organization. How would this kind of affect productivity as well? And finally, we wanted to share kind of 2 emerging workplace risks that organizations should pay attention to. If the focus again is on productivity and people's well-being. And one of the great things we get to do is not just kind of work on the things that these trends that we're doing, but also really explore and understand new things that are coming up as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit later.
So no further ado, let's look at the findings from this year's study. So as you can see, for the first time in the 5 years of our research, we have actually seen a slight drop in the global rate of workplace burnout. So it had sort of stabilized over the last couple of years at 38%, and it's now dropped to 35%. And at the same time, this tracks very closely with overall well-being. And it's probably not surprising that we see this correlation between the fluctuation of burnout and individuals' well-being. We've seen quite a significant improvement there in the last year, 25% improvement from 41 out of 100 to 55 out of 100. But of course, we're not there yet. That is a very fragile gain. And particularly when we're starting to see in the news and in the media sort of potentially that organizations and leaders may be starting to think about really dialing down the focus on well-being and the importance of people's well-being in the context of their work. We really want to take this opportunity to highlight how important it is that we actually double down right now and ensure that our well-being really is embedded in how we work. So tentative good news. We also, each year we look at how people rate their current well-being against how they felt about 12 months ago. And unsurprisingly, close to half of the population said that their well-being had improved, and about 30% each saying it was about the same or in fact worse compared to 12 months ago. We also look at a number of metrics around how people are actually doing right now. And in contrast to that sort of spike in overall well-being that we've seen, we are seeing some fairly low numbers there, with only 33% saying that they're satisfied with their job, 41% finding their role meaningful, and 31% saying that they're happy at work. So these numbers are really quite low, and there's a huge gap and space for growth there that leaders really need to be focusing on finding ways to, I think, drive those numbers up. We also ask people to give an indication of how they think their well-being will track in the next 12 months. And what we're seeing here is, I think, fairly conservative estimation, with people saying, about 6 out of 10 people saying that they're probably going to be at about the same, and 33 having that hope for perhaps better well-being in 12 months from now, and only 1 in 10 expecting their well-being to drop. And just briefly, because there are quite a lot of people on the call from Australia, and we had 29% participation from Australia in the study this year. We've actually seen a huge spike in burnout in Australia, from so up 17% in the course of a year to 43%. So that's tracking significantly above the global average. And I think raises some really interesting questions around what is going on in Australia at this moment that might be driving that increase in burnout. And as John mentioned, that means it's not just exhaustion, it's also the cynicism and reduced professional efficacy that is being experienced at a far higher rate in Australia at the moment. So where I think Australia had certainly been able to sort of position itself as something of an example to the rest of the world in the past, we're really seeing some cause for concern in Australia at this time. So we also wanted to look at some of the key questions that are being asked about work modalities at the moment, and try and get some insight into how these impact the rate of burnout. So the first question we looked at was, to what extent do the number of hours worked at a full-time rate impact the rate of burnout? With a particular sort of focus on the discussion around 4-day work weeks and reduced work hours modalities. And so what we're seeing here is the answer, does reducing your work time impact burnout? Really is yes. So for those organizations that have full-time work at 32 hours or less per week, we see a burnout rate of just 11%. And then that tracks very clearly upwards as we see those longer working weeks. So pretty clear data there. We also asked or looked at this, this discussion that is very widespread at the moment around mandatory return to office policies. The question being, what is the optimal number of days to require people to be in the office each week? How does that shape burnout? And we can see here that's a pretty clear indication that 2 days a week is probably a sweet spot. With burnout significantly lower there, although interestingly, very similar rate to having no required days in the office. We also looked at the rate of burnout and work location, so whether people are mainly working from home in a hybrid modality or mainly in the office. And this might seem slightly contradictory because we're seeing people who are mostly working from home having a slightly higher rate of burnout. And what this really underscores is that this is a very complex topic. And I think we really need to be shifting the question from what's the magic number in terms of days in the office to how are we structuring how we work, and how are we using the time that we have together in person to make sure that we're driving outcomes that genuinely work for people and optimize their ability to work, to collaborate, and to be their best selves at work. So this also underscores a conversation that I had on the We Are Human Leaders podcast recently with Professor Nick Bloom at Stanford, who has been researching this topic for over 15 years. And it really is about this shift from imagining that there is some magic number and magic days that we just get everyone into the office and then that will be the problem solved. It really is more complex than that. This year, we also, as John outlined, looked at intersectionality to sort of understand more deeply what it is about our identity that can perhaps create disparities in the workplace. So intersectionality refers to the way in which different aspects of someone's identity can expose them to overlapping forms of discrimination and marginalization. And so it's about understanding that people, as John mentioned, we bring these different aspects of ourselves to work and how this might impact our burnout, rates of burnout, and also well-being in the workplace. And what we see here is that sort of in terms of burnout, some different levels of burnout being experienced. Firstly, looking at gender. So last year we saw a gender gap of 12%. So there was a really significant difference. We've seen that gap reduce, though it is still there. Women are experiencing a higher rate of burnout at 38 compared to men at 32. And men have actually increased in burnout slightly from 30 to 32%, with women dropping 4% from 42. So that gap is narrowing. We're also seeing that people who are identify as having a disability having significantly higher rates of burnout than the general population at 59. Those as identifying as coming from an ethnic minority, almost 50%, and the LGBTIQ plus community experiencing a far higher rate of burnout than the general community. We also saw this year, and we've looked at caring responsibilities, asking people whether they have caring responsibilities each year through our research. And this year, for the first, it has sort of tracked that there really wasn't a disparity, that people who had caring responsibilities were actually experiencing burnout at about the same rate as those who don't have caring responsibilities. But this year, something changed, and we're seeing that people who don't have caring responsibilities experiencing burnout at a significantly higher rate, at 38% compared to 30, which really sort of leads to the question, what might people without caring responsibilities be able to learn from those who do have it? What are they getting right? And is there perhaps a protective quality that having caring responsibilities outside of work might have in terms of fortifying us against burnout? So now looking at that intersectionality. So when these different identities are experienced by people, and we see generally when we double click into the intersectionality that there really is a significant impact on the rate of burnout for those for certain groups. And particularly here, just to give a couple of examples, women who identify as coming from an ethnic minority experiencing burnout at 58%, so 23 above the global average. And women who identify as having a disability or another chronic condition experiencing burnout at 65%, which is in a huge disparity. And I think really just underscores how important it is that we understand that people are not a monolith, but also that identities are not a monolith. And we really need to take a much more granular approach to understanding how people experience their work lives and their different workplace experiences, and how this impacts us as individuals and not just as the labels that we might wear. So this year we also looked at the connection between well-being and productivity. There is a lot of talk about what we can do to start to drive productivity, but it's a topic that continues to be misunderstood, with economists, governments, and leaders in organizations still not really understanding how we might be able to best measure productivity, but also what levers we can pull to really start to drive productivity. This graph makes me really happy because it shows us really clearly that correlation between well-being and productivity over the years, that as our individuals' overall well-being starts to track and improve better, they also report having been more productive in the last 12 months. And what we're seeing there is quite a strong connection, that no sort of lag there, that as people's well-being improves, their productivity really tracks right there with it. So a really interesting finding. And I think there's a lot of talk about how perhaps we can leverage tech to improve productivity. But I think, we'd suggest, why not focus on embedding well-being in the workplace, because we've got this incredible data to show that that will actually be a really powerful lever for improving productivity.
Now, seeing that clear relationship between well-being and productivity, we wanted to kind of dig a little bit deeper into, well, what exactly should organizations be focused on? And so, what the data showed, the first thing we looked at was sort of mitigating burnout. And so, what the data shows is that for those not experiencing burnout, 53% reported that they were more productive versus only 15% of those who are experiencing burnout. And then we looked at psychological safety, and we found that those who feel psychologically safe in their workplace are 2.5 times more likely to report being more productive than those who do not. And then finally, the data shows that those who trust their organization are 41% more likely to report being more productive than those who don't have that high trust in the organization. And in the study this year, we also asked the participants what might be keeping people from being productive, and that what we found was sort of these as the top five here. And as you kind of read through each of these barriers, I would like you to kind of think a little bit about the well-being initiatives or the productivity improvements that your organizations are running um, this year or implementing this year. Do they address any of these five? If not, why not? Typically we see quite a lot in organizations pushing new technology as a way to improve productivity. And if you kind of look at that list, while maybe it will improve that first one on ineffective ineffective workplace processes, uh, maybe it actually may increase the frequency of interruptions. All of us have multiple kind of things pinging at us between Teams and Slack and text messages, all of those kind of things. Another system on there will be another thing to that, and not having enough time to complete work. New systems don't really kind of help with that. But overall, it's interesting to kind of see as people try to address one particular area, it might be causing problems in a separate area. Now, as we talk about productivity, I just kind of want to kind of break from the data real quick and just talk about this idea that workplace well-being is about empowerment, not entitlement. Because we hear this as we talk to organizations and leaders quite a lot. And I just want to be quite clear about something here. When we talk about workplace well-being, we're not talking about fruit bowls or yoga sessions at lunch. We're talking about addressing these systemic structures like workload. We are talking about how do we build stronger team connections. We're talking about how do we evaluate work structures and upskilling leaders so they can understand what sustainable work even looks like. And so I think it's really important that we shift how we define workplace well-being, or in our case, we call it workplace sustainability, away from this perception that it's a perk or it's some type of entitlement. Instead, really discuss it and recognize it as a strategic improvement or the strategic engine that really will drive long-term success. And in this current climate where we're seeing so many organizations kind of regress in their people policies and pull back in the support that they've been kind of providing, there's a real danger that any gains that's been made in this area is going to be lost if we don't shift this mindset and perspective that prioritizing workplace well-being is an investment, not just for people. It's not a nice to do, but it's an investment so that the organization can improve productivity and decrease costs and mitigate risk. Now, the fourth point here was about the erosion of workplace trust. The word trust is a really interesting concept. I bet for every one of us here, if I asked you to define trust, we probably all get very different kind of definitions of it. And kind of having looked up trust as a definition, there's probably as many definitions of trust as there are of expressions of love. Where there is agreement, though, is that trust is the foundation for any successful workplace. At work, people experience trust when they feel really confident in that a leader can or an organization can safely navigate them through the unknown. So trust isn't just about kind of leading them through something that they've been doing over and over again, but it's those cases when there is something about the unknown. You kind of hear this during that COVID period. Those leaders who did really well, they were the ones who were able to lead their people through the unknown. And this trust or this person, when a person's trust in the organization, it's what we found is to be a really strong variable that influences how energized they feel at work, how willing they are to collaborate, and even their intent to stay. So, years of layoffs, years of overwhelming workloads, and broken promises about promotions and pay rises, that's really eroded the trust in people have in the organizations. Leaders who claim to kind of care about their people, and we hear a lot of that, but at the same time, they're kind of demanding people work more with less. That's really a contradictory message. And at the end of the day, what that is doing is eroding trust. And so this year, you can see in those two charts there, the study investigates the effect of trust on organizational metrics and what that could mean. So what it shows, what we found was that most people still highly trust their direct manager, but that trust really decreases when you ask them about how much they trust their organization as a whole. So the question was, I trust that my organization will act in the best interests of its employees. And also that trust on so that chart on the right, what you see there is trust in the organization significantly changes depending on your job level. So the higher the job level, the more they trust the organization because they are the leaders. Obviously, they trust their own decisions. But as you get further away from that, at that individual contributor level, you have less access, or a lot of times they don't know who these kind of senior leaders are other than a name. That trust really erodes. If you see that chart there, individual contributors, only 41% really trust the organization. And that's quite, less than half of your organization trusting your, or less than half of the people trust the organization that they're working with. That becomes quite a problem when it comes to productivity. As we kind of mentioned earlier, there's a strong correlation between trust and productivity. And so that 40, if you only have 41% trusting, that will strongly reflect your ability to be productive as well. So each year, like I mentioned, we look into sort of those longitudinal kind of metrics that we always look into, like burnout and well-being. But this is sort of a really fun part for us. We get to go in and explore new concepts and new things that are happening within the workplace. And so there's two that we want to share. The first is what we're calling the distracted workers. So as the pace and complexity of work continues to accelerate, and the need for employees to stay focused and attentive is really critical. So what we're seeing is the rise of the distracted worker, where people's focus are really fractured by just the demands of kind of modern work. They've got all of these different technologies that they need to keep up with. There's sort of constant change that they need to learn, not to mention the really high levels of job demands and all of the work that they have to do. And so, individuals are really being pulled into multiple directions. And so rather than engaging deeply with the task at hand, they're thinking about 5 or 10 different kind of things and not doing any of those things well. And this lack of kind of being present, it can lead to a lot of errors, and it could lead to decreased efficiency, and it could lead to kind of that diminished capacity for that really meaningful work or meaningful kind of collaboration. I think we've all been in meetings where you're talking to somebody, but you can tell they're thinking about something else, the next meeting they're having or the work that they need to do. That type of distraction really causes problems within the organization. And so what we found in this year's study was that 17% of the population kind of falls into this kind of highly distracted group, and 17% falls into the low distraction group, and everybody else is sort of in the middle. And those stats on the chart on the right there, so you can see 36% of those highly distracted are also experiencing burnout, versus only 4% of those who are low in distraction. And 55% reported being less productive, and 25% report experiencing loneliness in the workplace. And so, this we really want to kind of raise that kind of this distraction, and having people so constantly on the go really poses a major risk for organizations. It really raises the risk profile for them. The increased likelihood of making a mistake, it can be quite detrimental for a lot of roles. Now, when I make a mistake, people are very annoyed and it's embarrassing for me, but that kind of is about the extent of that. But when somebody say, in the healthcare industry or cybersecurity industry, those other industries where it is really critical that they are able to kind of focus, when they lose focus and they make a mistake, there's sort of immense kind of consequences for both them and their organizations as well. Now, last year, our research looked into kind of general loneliness and its relationship with burnout. We were seeing sort of this pattern of this really broad kind of loneliness, growth in loneliness within society, and we saw that it kind of was similar to kind of the growth of burnout in the past couple of years. So we're really interested to see what the relationship was. And what we found was that those experiencing burnout were 2.5 times more likely to experience loneliness. However, that relationship was one directional. So being lonely did not have any effect on a person's likelihood to experiencing burnout. So it's that again, like, so if you are experiencing burnout, you're much more likely to experience loneliness, but it doesn't work with the other way around. I think that really kind of supports our initial definition that this is sort of a workplace, burnout is sort of a workplace phenomenon. And so this year, we kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this topic and look at loneliness in the workplace. So kind of specifically loneliness in the workplace, so not just general loneliness. And again, we found that those experiencing burnout are 2.5 times more likely to also be experiencing loneliness in the workplace. Those experiencing loneliness in the workplace have a 28% lower well-being score, are 2 times less likely to report being productive, and are 23 times more likely to be looking for another job. And when we talk about this to the leaders, and when we kind of debrief about this, we get a lot of eye rolling, and a lot of leaders might not feel like this is their priority, but when you look at these type of numbers and how this affect organizations and how those who are experiencing loneliness in the workplace have that effect on organizations, it's really important that they prioritize this. So as you can kind of see some of the stats there, people who are not experiencing loneliness, they are 57% more likely to report being more productive. 32%, they have 32% higher engagement rates, and they feel 33% higher in the psychological safety. And so, like those numbers, like I think any leader would kill for having any initiative that would be able to kind of drive those type of numbers within the organization. And so, this is why we want to raise this as something that organizations and leaders should really kind of focus on. It's not just good for the bottom line there, but it also really help address this bigger kind of loneliness epidemic that's sort of spreading across our society as well.
So that's quite a lot of data we've now shared with you. And I just want to shift gears for a moment and tell a little bit of a story. So there's a group of people walking along through the forest, and they come to a river and looking at the river, and they notice someone floating downstream and they appear to be drowning. So they reach out, they jump in, they try to save the person, and then suddenly they realize that there are more people starting to float down the river who are struggling. So again, they put all their efforts into pulling these people out and trying to rescue them. And eventually one person starts to head off into the forest, and someone turns to them and says angrily, "What are you doing? We need more help." And the person says, "I'm going upstream to find out why people are ending up in the river." And a few people join them, and they go for a hike along the river upstream. And they find that there is a bridge that's out, and there's a path that's starting to erode away, and that's where people are slipping and falling into the river. So they fix the bridge, they reinforce the pathway, they also put a little guardrail in and a few signs up. And in doing so, they're able to stop people falling into the river in the first place. And it's exactly this upstream approach that we need to bring when we're thinking about preventing burnout and driving productivity, and as well as ensuring that people are not experiencing loneliness in the workplace. It's all of these issues really need to start with a focus upstream and a systems approach that holds space for the complexity of a lot of these issues. So rather than simply focusing on those downstream interventions, which are still valid, we still need, to look after the people who are struggling in burnout, but we also need to really send a party to hike upstream and focus on what it is about the nature of work, the design of work, the structures and systems that really form the framework of our work, and ensure that these are as optimal as possible in an ongoing way to ensure that people are not ultimately ending up in burnout. And I think we're seeing burnout sort of hover around that rate of sort of mid-30s. And I think as long as we're still focusing on these downstream interventions, we're probably going to see that number to continue to be in that area. If we want to drive the rate of burnout globally down into the 20s, into the teens, and really see that reduction, it hinges on us bringing a systems approach to addressing and ending burnout.
As Sally mentioned, when we talk about having that systems approach, we mean looking at the entire organizational ecosystem. So that's looking at the policies, that's looking at the culture, the leadership, the process and workflows, and all those interpersonal dynamics that really kind of shape the employee experience within a workplace. And so while a lot of traditional approaches to burnout, they treat that as sort of an isolated and personal event. These issues really are symptoms of a bigger kind of systemic challenge that's been going on. And so, traditionally we focus on individual resilience. We see that we see resilience quite a lot. Encouraging employees to um, take mindful breaks, to practice self-care, build coping skills, and I don't. I want to say like those are all really important things that and very helpful things that everybody should have. But for the organizations, this kind of misses the forest from the trees. So this is kind of like saying, kind of imagine trying to fix a leaky roof by telling everybody to carry an umbrella indoors. So it's we got to fix the roof rather than trying to help everybody with these very individualized type of solutions. And so, in essence, the workplace sustainability framework it's about shifting that narrative of instead of asking about how can employees cope better or even know who within our organization is burning out, we ask how do we fix the system. So by embracing this kind of systems view, we are able to kind of create the workplaces where both people and the business can thrive. And so, based on our years of research and kind of experience working with organizations, we have found that there's these 5 elements that are essential to creating a sustainable workplace. So the first one there, protection from harm. So that's looking at the physical and psychosocial risk and hazards within the organization. Human leadership. It's about evolving the way leaders kind of think about ways of working. We know post-COVID, especially post-COVID, that there was a lot of these kind of traditional thinkings about what leadership is and is not. That is just no longer valid for today's workforce or the work environment. So how do we upskill leaders to make sure they are ready to lead in this new way? The third piece there, the people-centered structures. So a lot of the structures when we talk about this is making that link between the structures and well-being. Sometimes we have these conversations where we go in there talking about well-being, and we start talking about sort of job designs, your rewards, like the way you have designed your reward system, those kind of things. And oftentimes we kind of get a leader saying, "Hey, I thought you were coming in to talk about kind of well-being. You're talking about all of this kind of organizational development and all of this other stuff." And we really, but that's sort of where that's where a lot of the structural kind of changes is needed. That's what's creating when you kind of ask people where some of these root causes of stresses is a lot of those process kind of things. And so that's a really big part of the framework. The fourth piece there is about team connections. Within our research and lots of other research out there, just kind of really indicate how important it is to have a strong, supportive team. We know that when you have teams who are just really well connected. They back each other. They help each other quite a lot. You know, everything else around them could be kind of burning down, or there's could be a lot of stress. But that creates such a strong type of barrier within there. So how do we kind of build these type of connections within teams? Because a lot of times, I think even within the last few years, this is one thing that might have dropped quite a lot. Everyone is we just kind of focus on getting the work done without thinking about how do we do this work together. And so, with just the difficulties about hybrid work, things like that, a lot of times this team connection part has dropped. And I think that has played a little bit of a part into the productivity lull as well as some of the burnout as well. And finally, personal growth. So this one, you might kind of think that's very different than sort of some of the other ones because it's kind of structural. But what we've seen from a lot of people we've interviewed, we've talked to within burnout was this is one piece that's really important in if people will experience burnout or not. So, what we hear a lot in those experiencing burnout is they are doing the same work over and over again. And when you kind of get that boredom, when you get that kind of, oh, I'm doing the same thing, I'm not growing as a person or professionally, it plants the seed for all of the other problems to kind of really grow. Whereas on the other hand, if somebody could be working quite a lot, they're quite stressed, but if they're feeling like, oh, I know I've got a lot to do, but I'm learning so much. I'm loving the topics that I'm talking about, it is so it becomes quite invigorating for the person, and that's where sort of that personal uh, um, or the individual difference really comes in, and that's quite important. One example that we hear is when somebody goes to their manager say, "Hey, I'm really burnt out. I got all this stuff." The first thing that they do, um, other than saying, take a couple of days off, is why don't I take some work off of you? And it's generally the really kind of interesting type of work, the I guess more challenging but more interesting type of work. So they're kind of left with the more kind of everyday BAU type of work, and that actually perpetuates the problem. And what we hear from them is like, well, I didn't want to like not do the interesting stuff. I just wanted a better balance, or I want to get rid of the stuff that wasn't interesting or that wasn't kind of helping my development, kind of thing. So that's a really important thing to kind of consider as well as we kind of talk through this. Finally, there's four ways that infinite potential kind of helps organizations create these sustainable workplaces. The first is to provide a diagnostic of the current state of your organization using our workplace sustainability index. So that framework that we just kind of discussed, there is a way to use that to provide a diagnostic of what's going on within your organization. And yeah, for one example, one of our clients thought they were having issues with a workload and people were kind of screaming about how much work that they had. And so they were looking to kind of reduce the number of clients that they took on so they can reduce some of the workload. And so they went through the diagnostic, the workplace sustainability index. And so what they learned through that index was that the cause of the workload actually was not just the volume of work, but actually the biggest, the bigger kind of bottleneck was in that team connection part where there was a really big disconnect in how the different teams work together, and that was actually causing a lot of the extra work that was happening. So just having that type of insight significantly changed how they address the issue. Because if they had just reduced the number of clients they took on, that might have made things slightly better, but that root issue was still there. The second piece there is about design, and this is the one I get most excited about because right now there's no templates that you can follow about creating. There's no templates out there on what your organization should do, and once we find out what the issue and what some of the root causes are, we can kind of co-design. What we do is we kind of co-design with our clients these kind of tailored pilots and experiments to see what works and what doesn't work for your team. And this is sort of where that kind of creativity meets data, where we try out different ways of working. Um, and what these pilots help us really do is kind of test what works for you, and something that that really creates sort of that competitive advantage. Others can't kind of copy that from you. And I think one of the best things is during these kind of projects is you engage the team to be part of the solution, and they really get engaged and they really get excited about being in these kind of test groups and trying out different ways of working, and you see a lot of benefits from doing that. The next piece there is what we call kind of embed, and we know that for long-term success, what we need is leaders who can create and nurture these sustainable work environments. And it's not enough to just kind of launch a couple pilots here and there and to find out what's the best way of working. You actually need to integrate these practices and sustain them on the long term. And that's where you really need to upskill leaders to make sure they've got all the tools and skills to kind of continue this kind of success. And so our Sustainable Leader Workshop provides participants with the tools and sort of that mindset to understand how do you create this environment, how do you sustain it, how do you motivate people for this within their workplace. And finally, we also provide independent evaluations of programs and initiatives that either yourselves or a vendor has implemented. And so by providing sort of that independent view, we ensure that we have, we got no stake in the game other than to make sure that what is happening, you have a clear understanding of the impact of whatever initiative that's happening on the organization. And so you see there, there's the kind of URL for the if you want to download the full report, or you can just kind of go to the Infinite Potential website, and you'll be able to see that where you can get that pretty quickly. So on behalf of Sally and the rest of the Infinite Potential team, we would like to thank all of you for joining us today for the launch of the State of Workplace Burnout Report. We would love to have a chat to discuss some further details about the report. If you want to get more into some of the data, we're happy to kind of share that. As we kind of mentioned, we have a lot of data, which just kind of presented some of what we had there. So we would love to kind of answer any questions you have. So again, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.